While creating too much hype around EMs or around audio products in general has been a problem for this hobby, THIEAUDIO and Linsol decided to launch the ultimate blunder. This is the THIEAUDIO Hype 2. I don't even know what you're supposed to do. Like, not hype it, hype it. It's hype 2. You have to hype it at least a little bit to show appreciation to THIEAUDIO for having the courage to name their EM like this. And with the package out of the way, we now have the EMs. They look pretty traditional. I mean, if you've seen a THIEAUDIO EM before, they look exactly like the other releases. But the magic happens on the inside. This one has 2 dynamic drivers on each ear and also 1 balanced armatures and another driver. I do have here the blue version, and it is the better looking version, I think, of the Hype 2 series. They do come with detachable cables based on the 2-pin connector. There are 2-pin sockets on the EMs, and since they do have dynamic drivers, they also have ventilation. The ventilation is right here at this little beak, but with one little mention. You still have to be careful when inserting and when taking out the Hype 2, because if you do push them too fast into your ear, you may hear a bit of driver flex and a bit of void. The cable is one of those traditional cables that you typically see on Hi-Fi EMs. The cable is ended in a 3.5mm connector, and for an about $300 EM, it is a pretty traditional setup. Where things do start to get a little bit more interesting is when it comes to the comfort, because the Hype 2 is quite comfortable and I'm not hyping that up too much. They are a comfy pair of EMs. They do have a rounded shell on the inside made of resin, which doesn't create any kind of irritation in contact with the ear. They do have a pretty normal size for the ear canal, which is 6mm at maximum and 5.5mm in the main canal body. For reviewing them, I have used tips from DD Hi-Fi because I do prefer those tips and they create a more consistent reviewing setup for me, because having the same pair of tips will exclude one of the variables when reviewing. But the original tips work quite well and they are quite comfortable too. One thing that I fully forgot to mention is how hard it is to get the box out of the sleeve. So they are kind of glued together. Before reaching the sound part of today's review, I wanted to check what kind of carrying case they come with. And just as expected, the carrying case was already out of the box, because I did review them and I did already take the photos, and I even wrote the full written review for them already. You will get extra tips in the package. You will also get foam tips, a cleaning cloth, and the separator for the cable. The cable is not very tangle prone, which is pleasing, and it also doesn't conduct microphonics very much. The transport case has a better color than most of the THIEAUDIO cases. This one is black in color, which looks much more professional than the gray ones they included in the past. Back to the EMs, the Hype 2 is most likely hyped because of its sound. So I have not even seen a single review yet at the point of filming this video review. I don't know what other people think of them, but with my rather vast experience of reviewing of over 600 products to date, I would say that the Hype 2 has an excellent price-performance ratio compared to the vast majority of EMs out there. So those ones are priced at $300. That makes them a direct competitor to Hidiz's MS5, which was a personal favorite of mine, also to Ibeso IT05, which is also a personal favorite of mine. Both of those are very, very strong in the bass. So here we have the THIEAUDIO Hype 2. Hype 2 tends to not be quite as bassy as most of the alternatives. It actually goes for a more natural sound with a more natural mid-range and with a sparklier yet somewhat smoother treble too. This being said, it is still a V-shaped EM, so you will get a slightly stronger sub-bass, strong bass, slightly recessed mid-range. It is not strongly recessed. Then we have an increase in the energy and presence of the treble, energy, air, and sparkle. Since there are no removable filters on the EM, this means that you will likely have to get used to the sound or use a source with a different tuning if you want to tune them. On that note, they are very easy to drive. They have a high CPL of 108 decibels, a low impedance of 25 ohms, and from what is written on the package, you would say that they are very easy to drive. And I would say they are even easier to drive than I was expecting. So anything like a dongle DAC will do, but the low impedance dictates that they may inherit some hissing and they will show background noise. You will need a source that has very little background noise to fully enjoy the THIEAUDIO Hype 2. The signature tends to have one of the most natural mid-ranges that I've heard, which makes them really pleasing for rock, metal, punk, pop, jazz, classical. Basically every single musical style sounds very enjoyable out of them. The presentation tends to make music more lively. It tends to reproduce music in the same manner that you would hear it in a live setting. For example, in a concert, club, dance hall, basically anywhere where music typically is played live, loud, forward, aggressive, and with a full body to it. And I like that about the Hype 2 quite a lot. For example, in rock music and in metal music, you will absolutely hear the impact of the drums, you will hear the impact of the bass guitar, you will hear the bassist playing, which is a really pleasing experience for rock music. You will hear the sub bass and the bass line in electronic music, for example, in Zomboid tracks or in Apache tracks. You will also hear the bass having very, very little distortion. So it has a very smooth, very rounded presentation that doesn't have a lot of texture, but it presents music very naturally, without fatigue and without grain. And I think that is great, because usually you don't want grain in your music. Grain creates the perception of false detail, but it also tends to be fatiguing for most listeners. I personally prefer a sound that has as little grain as possible for most musics. For example, even in rock and metal, less grain means less pseudo detail, but hearing more actual detail, which makes music more natural, more pleasing, and more coherent. For example, when you have an arrangement of multiple guitars, you will understand better what each guitar is playing if you don't have grain, while if you have grain, they will sound very textury, but you will notice that it isn't quite natural. You won't be able to understand the layers of guitars. You will just hear a lot of musical notes. Hype 2 is very much grain-free in bass, in the mid-range, and in the treble. The mid-range tends to be very natural and also very honest to the source. This means that, for example, when we have a track that is recorded to sound very live, very wide, very holographic, Zomboid tracks are a good example of this, they will sound as such. But on the other hand, if you use the Hype 2 to listen to YouTube tracks which have been compressed both dynamically and spatially sometimes, you will hear that compression. I did this test where I listened to the album FLAC version of a track that I ripped from the CD and the YouTube available version on YouTube. And the difference was quite drastic. So Hype 2 will be able to give you that extra detail and extra enjoyment from owning CDs and from having a high resolution music collection. But this means you will have to have a good collection of music, which can be quite bothersome, you know, because I don't have every single piece that I have in my collection in a good resolution. Some of them are very old stuff that I don't even know where I could find the CDs to re-burn them again and such. So Hype 2 will show you if your library is of a good quality or not. The treble of the Hype 2 tends to be bright, energetic, sharp, airy, and holographic. It adds a lot of air, or rather it plays the air if it was recorded in the track. So brighter songs will sound quite bright, while smoother songs will sound smooth. They won't have an added amount of treble, but they are a bright pair of EMs. So when something is bright, it will sound quite bright. The treble doesn't have grain and it does not have a harsh texture, which means that Hype 2 will play most music quite naturally and it won't be fatiguing, which I think is quite important for rock, metal, electronic music, and basically every single music style. You don't want to get tired from listening to music, you want to have fun, to enjoy your library, and you have to hype yourself up for more music listening. And in general, I think that the THIEAUDIO Hype 2, despite the somewhat ironic name, is a very high quality product. As I was saying at the beginning of the video, comparing it to other EMs which have been released recently, most of them are more bass head, most of them have much more sub bass, more bass, but the bass is slower and doesn't have quite the impact and quite the tactile feeling of the bass of the THIEAUDIO Hype 2. Also, most of the other EMs tend to recess the mid-range more. Both iBasso IT05 and Hidizis MS5 will show the mid-range more recessed, which means that voices will be pushed backwards, which will create a slightly hollow feeling compared to the Hype 2, which doesn't create that hollower feeling. Hype 2 will bring voices more forward to you. It will turn voices slightly more aggressive, but that will help with hearing the synthesizers more, guitars more, and basically every single instrument, because most of the music information is in the mid-range and not in the treble or in the bass. and you want to hear the mid-range naturally. You don't want the mid-range to be too forward or too recessed. You want it to be just perfect. And I think the THIEAUDIO Hype 2 is just perfect. It really creates the feeling that it sounds natural, that everything is just playing as it should. It is pleasing, and it is an EM that I can fully recommend to you. When purchasing this, I would recommend purchasing it from either Lean Soul, which is the company that provided the sample for today's review, and I thank them, or from Amazon, which is also supported by Lean Soul because they are the ones selling the Hype 2 on Amazon. Either way, please do check the links in the video description if you want to purchase a pair of THIEAUDIO Hype 2. Also, please do check my other videos. If you want to subscribe, I would really appreciate it. Leave a like on the video if you are enjoying the new content, and I thank you so much for watching. I hope we'll see each other really soon. Bye bye. Bye.